Ambushed but defiant, Theresa May sticks to her Brexit plan after EU leaders and her own MPs say it won't work.
Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work.
Our white paper remains the only serious and credible proposition on the table.
Good evening. Theresa May issued a message of defiance to her EU counterparts today, even as top officials warned that a key part of her Brexit plan will not work. The Prime Minister is insistent that hers is the only serious and credible proposal on the table. The standoff has set up a tense month of negotiations as time runs out for both sides to seal a deal. Coming up, we'll be asking whether the Chequers plan can survive. First, though, our political editor Faisal Islam reports on Theresa May's difficult day in Salzburg.
A Prime Minister isolated, in a place and at a moment where she badly needed some friends. At the very least here in Salzburg, Theresa May needed a helping hand from fellow leaders as she enters some treacherous domestic political waters. And yet, having talked up confidence in a deal and compromise, the UK's ally in brokering one, Council President Donald Tusk, emerged from EU leaders' private talks and applied what appeared a fatal blow to her Chequers plan.
Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work.
In a neighbouring room, at the same time, with no-deal risks rising, the Dutch Prime Minister made this unhelpful assessment about UK preparedness.
I think we have made more preparations for a no deal than the United Kingdom has. But there are, of course, many issues to be dealt with.
As aides scramble to lower the temperature of a sweltering summit, Theresa May and Mr Tusk had just had a robust conversation.
I've just had a frank bilateral meeting with President Tusk. He's confirmed the commitment of the other 27 member states to reaching a deal as soon as possible.
Her aides say these were the words of a defiant Prime Minister, but she looks rattled and uncomfortable, clinging to Chequers and decrying what she said was a mere negotiating ploy.
Prime Minister, it was you that said rather recently it's either my deal or no deal. As we've heard, the EU Council, having talked about this, the EU27 have said Chequers won't work. The Dutch Prime Minister just stood at that lectern and said the Netherlands is better prepared for no deal than the UK. Isn't this all starting to fall apart now?
The proposal we have put forward is the only proposal on the table that actually delivers on that long-term sustainable future by offering the free and frictionless movement of goods across borders. So if there are concerns from the European Union, let's hear what those concerns are, and let's sit down and look at those concerns.
It certainly sparked memories of her famous election claim that nothing has changed, but something here has. The problem may stem back to an early meeting this morning with the Irish leader Leo Varadkar. Irish sources briefing that the PM had told him it was impossible to get a solution to the border guarantees required by next month.
We're going to get a deal. An accidental no deal has always been a possibility, but I think we can achieve it. It's absolutely in the interests of the United Kingdom, Ireland and the European Union that we have a deal.
We will never accept a deal which will damage the European Union and its integrity, for sure.
The bad cops in this Brexit negotiation, France's President Macron and his compatriot Michel Barnier, won the day here. But at what price?
This summit ended badly for the Prime Minister. The proposals over which she spent so much domestic political capital have been rejected by the very people for whom they were designed as a compromise. The negotiations could now descend into a massive game of no-deal chicken with severe economic consequences. She returns to the United Kingdom with little political cover for her plans within her own party.
So long from the city of the Sound of Music for Theresa May. Farewell and auf Wiedersehen from EU leaders to her Chequers plan. And for many in her party, it's goodbye to a Brexit deal. And perhaps her premiership too. Faisal Islam, Sky News in Salzburg.
Theresa May may be fighting to save her Chequers plan and her authority as Prime Minister. But back in the UK, her party's more moderate MPs are refusing to back her plans. The government is proposing that the UK will leave the European Customs Union and also end the jurisdiction of the European Court in the UK. But the plan is to share a common rulebook on goods with the EU so that there could be frictionless trade. And that would also mean having to abide by at least some of the European Court rulings. Here's our chief political correspondent, John Craig, on how Westminster responded to the ambush in Austria.
Is Chequers devastating?
Hello, good morning. I'm just going for a run.
In a hurry, a minister who's supposedly one of the Cabinet's supporters of Theresa May's Chequers plan. The dead as a dodo claim came from a previously loyal ex-minister, although he was sacked by the Prime Minister, who accused her of trying to blackmail MPs.
Of course, it's very difficult for her, and I accept that. But if people like me, I am so moderate, but on Brexit, the people spoke, they've said what they wanted, and Chequers doesn't deliver that.
The Chequers plan, agreed by the Cabinet at a special summit at the PM's country retreat in July, was supposed to break the Brexit deadlock and bind the bitterly divided Tory party together. But David Davis, who quit as Brexit Secretary immediately after Chequers, now says the plan is anti-democratic and she won't get it through Parliament.
More and more members of Parliament are deciding to vote against Chequers and not to support it. So it's going to look to be very, very difficult indeed to deliver Chequers in Parliament.
The timing of the Salzburg snub could not be worse for Theresa May, coming just 10 days before the Conservative Party conference, which now looks set to be dominated by calls from Brexiteers to chuck Chequers.
And there'll be no help or sympathy for the Prime Minister from Labour, who say she's to blame if there's no deal.
The red lines that have bedevilled the process are red lines that she set down at the very start. She said, I'll have nothing to do with the single market, nothing to do with the customs union, no European court involvement. She set the conditions for failure. So sympathy sort of down the road is a bit thin on the ground.
And just when the PM thought her problems couldn't get any worse, came a reminder of the 2016 EU referendum.
It doesn't matter what concession we make to these gangsters, they will always come back and ask for more. I'm afraid Mrs May's now in a real pickle.
Chuck Chequers! Chuck Chequers!
And while Brexiteers turn up the heat on the Prime Minister, Remainers are also stepping up their demands for a so-called people's vote.
How are you, all right?
John Craig, Sky News.
Well, Sky's Europe correspondent Mark Stone is in Salzburg for us. And Mark, what really struck me about today was just how shaken the Prime Minister looked in that press conference, as if she really wasn't expecting to see what unfolded. I mean, what do you think the relationship is like at the minute between Number 10 and Theresa May and the EU, and what does that mean for the prospects of getting a deal?
I think you're right. She didn't expect this one bit. There was an expectation that at the end of this informal summit, she would have been given the cover that she so desperately needs to get her through the next few weeks domestically. The EU, the Brussels machine, is fully aware of how fragile her position back home is at the moment and how difficult the Brexit process is for her, but they've been warning her of that throughout this process, and they made the calculation that they needed to keep on the pressure, that they have given her every concession that they possibly can, that she is still trying to cherry pick and trying to choose the different parts of the EU that suits the UK and ditch those parts that doesn't, and that is simply not going to fly. British sources are describing what happened today as an ambush. They didn't expect it at all. But when you talk to sources on the EU side, they say this is simply mismanagement on the British behalf of expectations. The British thought that they could get more. One side on this negotiation is misjudging the other. It's looking increasingly clear tonight that the side that is misjudging is the British, that the European Union is not going to move, not going to budge any further. And with
just a month or so until that key summit. We'll leave you with one image tonight, and that is bizarrely the Instagram account of Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council. It's quite funny if it wasn't so serious. A photograph of him with Theresa May. He's saying, a piece of cake, question mark, no cherries.
I think that picture perhaps says more about the relationship than lots of words. Mark, thank you very much.
The Prime Minister's Brexit plan is rejected by the European Union as she's told it will not work. At the summit in Austria, Theresa May had been hoping for some support from EU leaders for her Chequers proposals, but the response was blunt.
The suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work, not least because it risks undermining the single market.
Let's sit down and look at those concerns. But what we need to ensure is that at the end of the day, the deal that comes out of this is one that delivers for the British people.
The Prime Minister was looking for a polite reception. Instead, her plans rebuffed. We're live in Salzburg as the Prime Minister flies home into a storm.
We'll be assessing how difficult the weeks ahead will now be for the Prime Minister, both at home and abroad. Good evening. Theresa May's attempt to convince EU leaders of the merits of her plan for Brexit has ended in failure. At the end of the two-day summit in Austria, the Prime Minister was told a crucial part of it, the proposed new economic partnership with the EU, would not work. The head of the European Council, Donald Tusk, said her plans risked undermining the EU's single market. But the Prime Minister insists her proposals are the only serious, credible way to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg reports from Salzburg.
Following her every move, every step matters. In this spectacle, neither side wants to budge.
Brexit. No, there is no progress. There is only position explained. Standoff still is in place.
As long as there is no deal, there is a risk of a no deal. But I think we all want to work towards a deal, and I still think it is achievable.
She'd hoped for more than jokey small talk. The Prime Minister wanted at least a polite reception for her Brexit compromise, the so-called Chequers plan. But they just don't like her idea to keep part of the economy close to the EU and to try to preserve the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland as it is. Don't doubt, this is 1 against 27.
Es ist heute deutlich geworden, dass wir bis Oktober substanzielle Fortschritte.
From the German Chancellor, a polite rebuff. Substantial progress is needed.
Que ceux qui expliquent qu'on peut faire facilement sans l'Europe.
The French president said the proposals were not acceptable.
Sont des menteurs.
And those who said Britain could leave easily were liars. Then, from the boss of the European Leaders Club, few words about a promising start or interesting idea. The UK plan will not stand.
Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work.
How could she walk back from that rejection? Remember, many of her party at home hate her Brexit plan too. Theresa May could not pretend this afternoon that nothing had changed. Instead, she was cross and frustrated.
Our white paper remains the only serious and credible proposition on the table.
So with the EU against your plan, with large chunks of your party at home against your plan, how can you credibly cling on to the deal you struck at Chequers with your cabinet?
Well, look, I'm negotiating, and I'm negotiating hard in the interests of the British people. Yes, concerns have been raised. I want to know what those concerns are. There's a lot of hard work to be done, but I believe that there is a willingness to do a deal. But let nobody be in any doubt that, as I've always said, we are preparing for no deal.
And have the chances of no deal just gone up?
We are continuing to work for a good deal. I think you will have heard both President Tusk and a number of the EU leaders saying that they are looking and hoping, working to that good deal. But there's a lot of work to be done. very hot in that.
It certainly is, Prime Minister. More heat from rival voices trying to force her to ditch her plan.
It's looking very clear. It's going to be very, very difficult to deliver a Chequers strategy that will meet their requirements. So it's time for a reset, time for a rethink.
The Prime Minister can't and won't step away from her proposals yet. But the choreography of doing the deal today has gone badly wrong.
There's plenty of evidence they all want to do a deal, but much less proof that they actually can. And it's not dramatic to say that how Theresa May can resolve her differences with the rest of her counterparts from the continent will have an effect on how we all live our lives for years and years to come.
The UK is on its way out of this club, but Theresa May is finding this a long and lonely way out.
Well, in a moment, we'll get more from Laura. But first, let's speak to our Europe editor, Katya Adler. In terms of Brussels, the rest of the EU leaders, what happens now?
Well, let's look first at Theresa May's perspective. And the summit was a bit of a disaster for her. She was hoping for those warm words and she didn't get it. Her critics at home were waiting to see if her Chequers Brexit plan would belly flop in front of the 27 EU leaders. But from the EU perspective, nothing concrete changed here. Their objections to part of the Chequers proposal on the Northern Ireland border and also on future trade relations between the EU and the UK after Brexit were well known, so they weren't new. And at this summit, leaders said they thought a deal would still be possible this autumn. They said concessions would need to be made by both sides, including their own. So despite the upset tonight, Brexit negotiations continue. If enough progress is made on those difficult issues by the EU leaders' next summit next month in October, they say they'll call a special Brexit summit to seal the deal. Now, is this pie in the sky? Surely Theresa May's plan number one now has to be to survive the Conservative Party conference intact.
And Laura, you said that the Prime Minister is flying home tonight into a storm. Just how difficult are the next few weeks and months indeed going to be for the Prime Minister?
Sophie, I think the next 24 and 48 hours will be extremely difficult too. This is acute, not just because the EU leaders voiced their criticisms so strongly, more strongly than Number 10 had been expecting, but because her party at home had already been frothing with anger, concern and fears about the so-called Chequers deal. Not everybody in the Conservative Party was unhappy, of course. There are many MPs in the middle who wanted it to work. But there have been very strong former Remainer voices and Brexiteer voices who have looked at these proposals, said that they just not do stack up, and absolutely have made clear that they will fight them all the way. And lo and behold, here today, the European Union has joined that chorus and said the plans as they stand are not workable. So Theresa May, in a sense, finds herself surrounded by European leaders and people in her own party, just 10 days or so away from the Conservatives' annual gathering, their party conference. She has so little room for manoeuvre. That doesn't, of course, mean that somehow the whole thing is off. A bust-up between the top brass in Europe is not surprising in such a long process. But the timing of this is very embarrassing for the Prime Minister, and the fact that time is running out means there's not very long for her and her officials and the rest of her ministers to find a solution. This is the biggest thing that she has to achieve as leader. She needs authority in order to drive it through, but right now, tonight, it doesn't seem that there's much authority around.
Laura Kunsberger and Katya Adler, thank you.
It has been a very difficult, even catastrophic day for the Prime Minister in Salzburg. She travelled to Austria hoping to receive encouraging noises about the progress of her Brexit deal. Instead, she got this.
Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work.
In the aftermath, she appeared rattled, just as she was in the last election.
Yes, concerns have been raised. I want to know what those concerns are, but let nobody be in any doubt that, as I've always said, we are preparing for no deal.
And to round off the day, the French president mounted a full frontal assault on the Brexiters back here.
Those who explained we can easily live without Europe and will have more money are liars.
In short, her plan looks dead in the water. We will be trying to assess where we all go from here. Good evening. If Theresa May thought tough language and tough tactics would persuade her fellow EU leaders of the merits of her Chequers plan for Brexit, she was left in no doubt today. They did not like it one little bit. She went in hard last night, saying it was the only plan on offer, and she went in high, in effect going over the head of the EU's chief negotiator, possibly a bit of a mistake. Not only did the European Council President Donald Tusk say it was not work, in a flash of something approaching anger, France's President Macron said British voters had been lied to by Brexiters about how easy it would be to leave the EU. So where does all this leave us tonight? Well, potentially, indeed, heading for a no-deal exit with the possibility of another referendum before we get there, just to be sure it's really what we want.
She knew it would be a hard sell. British diplomats are fully aware of Europe's reservations about her Chequers plan. But Theresa May hadn't expected this, an outright rejection of a proposal that she insists is the only one on offer. Council President Donald Tusk didn't mince his words.
While there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work. Not least because it risks undermining the single market.
Other leaders were saying the same, that the Chequers plan is dead. But what followed was the sort of denial of reality last seen from this Prime Minister during the most troublesome days of the general election campaign.
Yes, concerns have been raised. I want to know what those concerns are. There's a lot of hard work to be done, but I believe that there is a willingness to do a deal. But let nobody be in any doubt that, as I've always said, we are preparing for no deal.
Again and again she spoke about being ready for no deal if that intractable problem of the Irish border can't be solved.
Do you wish now that last year you would never agreed to the principle of the Northern Ireland backstop? Because it's caused you no end of trouble, hasn't it?
I think it is absolutely a key part of these negotiations, as I've made very clear, that we deliver for the people of Northern Ireland.
Even if that means no deal?
If there is no agreement on a deal that is acceptable to the United Kingdom, then we're preparing for no deal.
It was as animated as anyone could remember seeing her.
Very hot in that.
And she may not have been talking about the temperature. And if she was bullish about Britain leaving with no deal, then so were the European Commission.
The Commission has prepared in detail all the elements of consequences of a no deal which could be entailed by a no deal. So don't worry, be happy, don't worry.
It seems that Germany's Chancellor Merkel and France's President Macron were happy to authorise this diplomatic humiliation. Macron following up with an extraordinary attack on leading Brexiters. Those who explained we can easily live without Europe and will have more money, he said, are liars. And they left the day after so as not to have to deal with it. As a parting shot, Donald Tusk posted a photo on Instagram of him offering Mrs May a cake. "Sorry, no cherries," read the slightly bitchy tagline. It was a brutal end to a brutal day. The warmth of the farewell kiss from President Macron, not disguising the fact that he's believed to have argued hardest for today's tough line with the British. People are used to EU negotiations that go down to the wire before finding some last-minute compromise. But those have always been negotiations amongst fellow members. This time it's a face-off with a country that is leaving. And waiting for that last-minute extend the deadline fudge may just not work this time. James Mates, News at 10, Salzburg.
Boy, oh boy. Robert's here, of course. We haven't got any cake, I'm afraid, let alone with cherries. What an extraordinary tweet that was. Where do we go from here? What's the plan?
So, look, make no mistake, this is very serious indeed. We had the representative of EU governments, Donald Tusk, not the EU Commission, but the representative of the governments, saying that her Chequers plan for a special customs area and special deals for goods flowing to and from the EU won't work, right? That is their official position. But tonight. The official position of Downing Street, they have told me this, remains that this is just tough negotiating and they will battle on for this plan. Now, everybody that I know, both in Brussels and who is steeped in these negotiations, says that this is ludicrous to be battling on in this way. And the risk, they say, is that we get to October, the deal is still rejected, and we've got nowhere to go except a no-deal Brexit. Now, at the same time, there's a part of her own party, the European Research Group and their sympathisers, who will, in the next few days, put out an alternative plan, which actually paradoxically, because it's based much more on the way that the EU runs things, might be more acceptable to the EU. But the Prime Minister has said categorically she's not going to have
Okay, so
any
what
of that.
about we go forward, she doesn't get a plan, what is no deal going to be like? Are we going to have another referendum? What is your...
So, I do not myself believe that Parliament will back no deal. Okay, there are a fairly substantial number of Tory MPs who think no deal would not be a disaster for the UK, but in terms of Parliament, they are a minority. Now, I think it is I think highly likely in those circumstances that Parliament will assert its authority and force a referendum on the government. That, of course, would be the end of her career because she set her face so against a referendum. And for the rest of us, we'd have to make up our own minds again, which millions of British people will not relish. And I have to say, it's not just one. The serious point is millions of people who voted for Leave will feel betrayed, and constitutionally and democratically the stakes will be very high if that happens.
OK, all right, let's see if we get there. Thank you very much indeed for now.